Welcome to the Explainer. So today I want you to literally step into the shoes of a lead investigator. We are pulling back the curtain on this massive, incredibly complex landscape of geographic data compiled by NDTV, and we're going to map out the very anatomy of lawlessness in modern India. We're looking exactly at what the geography of crime looks like in a nation that is modernizing at just an unprecedented speed. It's a really fascinating journey, and by the end of this, I promise you, you're going to see the data in a completely new light. Okay, let's dive into this. When we hear about crime on the news, it's super easy to get caught up in sweeping generalizations, right? Or just focus on those isolated, sensational headlines. But if we want to truly understand what's going on, we have to ask a really fundamental question. What does lawlessness actually look like? To figure that out, we are stepping totally away from the daily news cycle today. We're just looking strictly at what the map tells us. We're letting the geographic realities and the hard data drive the entire conversation. Because the scale we are dealing with here, it is absolutely staggering. We aren't just looking at a few dozen localized spreadsheets anymore. We are looking at literally millions of geographic data points mapped across the entirety of India. Just think about the sheer complexity of policing a rapidly modernizing nation of over 1 billion people. As infrastructure expands, as these massive cities boom, and as technology reaches the most remote corners of the country, the whole footprint of lawlessness shifts. It's this massive, living, breathing data set. So to make sense of it all, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the scale of the map. Second, we'll examine the urban versus rural divides. Third, we'll explore the cybercrime frontier. Fourth, we'll track traditional offenses. And finally, we'll zoom out for the big picture takeaways. This is our macro to micro journey through the data. All right, starting with Section 1, the scale of the map, taking things from the abstract to reality. Now, our goal here is to remain entirely impartial, just looking at the regional mapping and letting the numbers speak for themselves. Because when you look at raw statistics in a vacuum, they can feel, well, incredibly abstract. A number goes up, a number goes down. But NDTV's mapping transforms those abstract stats into a very clear geographic reality. Suddenly, you aren't just staring at a spreadsheet, you are looking at the exact intersection of geography and law enforcement. You can actually see how an interstate highway or a brand new industrial zone or a densely populated district actively shapes the flow of illicit activity across India's vast landscape. Moving on to Section 2, urban versus rural divides. These are some seriously contrasting environments. Obviously, crime does not look the same in a bustling metropolis as it does out in the countryside, and these stark contrasts are absolutely fundamental to understanding the whole picture. When we look at rural areas, the data shows this steady, localized pattern. We see a lot of traditional disputes, land-related conflicts, and infractions deeply tied to the immediate physical geography. But as our focus shifts to urban centers, the pace and nature of the data completely change. Suddenly, it's a rapid concentration of complex financial crimes, corporate fraud, and highly sophisticated property offenses. The environment entirely dictates the anatomy of the crime. Now, what's really interesting about this is that these crime categories aren't even uniform within those urban and rural divides. The data clusters into very specific socioeconomic zones. For instance, we see significant northern metropolitan shifts where high population density heavily influences property crime. Down south, we see state variations that are often tied directly to different industrial developments. And honestly, perhaps most fascinating of all, we are seeing anomalies in emerging Tier 2 cities. These are those rapidly growing areas caught somewhere between rural traditions and urban modernization, and they're creating entirely new hotspots on the map. Which brings us to Section 3, the cybercrime frontier, the great digital shift. That modernization leads us straight into the digital era, and the trends explicitly highlighted by the NDTV mapping data are easily the most disruptive force in modern law enforcement. When we compare cybercrime reports over recent years across the northern, southern, eastern, and western regions, we see a very distinct pattern. Notice how, unlike physical property crimes, these numbers do not respect state lines or geographic barriers at all. A financial scam can easily originate in a small eastern town and target victims in a western tech hub instantly. The data shows that digital lawlessness entirely transcends traditional physical borders, and that requires a completely different type of police. And this brilliantly illustrates just how dramatic that upward shift in digital and cyber offenses really is compared to previous eras. While traditional crime curves often stay relatively flat or, just fluctuate slightly with population growth, this cyber curve is nearly vertical. It is the single most dramatic shift in the anatomy of modern Indian crime, completely redefining where and how citizens are vulnerable today. Okay, on to Section 4,
Tracking traditional offenses. Let's look at the physical footprint. Because even with that huge digital explosion, we can't ignore the physical worlds. Let's zoom back into the actual physical streets, neighborhoods, and districts to examine how historical forms of lawlessness are still being tracked. When we say traditional crime here, we're talking about offenses involving direct physical confrontation, localized property theft, or historical patterns of lawlessness. These are the crimes that have existed for centuries, the ones that happen in physical space and leave a tangible, physical footprint.
When we break down the total mapped crimes, you can really see the exact anatomy of the current landscape. We have three main segments here: traditional property crimes, violent offenses, and those emerging digital crimes we were just talking about. Looking at these proportions completely impartially, you can see that while digital crime is absolutely the fastest growing slice of the pie, traditional property and violent offenses still make up a massive portion of the map. So law enforcement isn't just fighting some new digital war, they are fighting a complex, multi-front battle that spans from physical neighborhoods all the way to digital networks. And over the last decade, which we've marked out here in 2-year intervals, law enforcement's ability to map and track these offenses has evolved incredibly. We've gone from highly localized, paper-based reporting to very sophisticated, centralized digital mapping. It's a constant game of cat and mouse. As society modernizes and crime evolves, the tools used to map, track, and predict those crimes have had to evolve chronologically right alongside them. Finally, Section 5, the big picture takeaways. Let's take a socioeconomic view. Now that we've analyzed all these specific regional and digital trends, let's zoom all the way back out and connect these varied points into a cohesive picture of modern India. So the crucial point is that India's modernization directly impacts these trends in 3 very distinct ways. Step 1. Geographic mapping reveals that vulnerabilities are highly localized. What plagues a rural district is just entirely different from a Tier 2 city. Step 2. Rapid urbanization is actively shifting the gravity of crime from physical altercations over to sophisticated digital and financial offenses. And Step 3. Law enforcement can no longer rely on a one-size-fits-all approach. They absolutely must adapt dynamically to these hyper-specific regional realities. Ultimately, the NDTV mapping analysis resolves our investigation today perfectly with this thought. The anatomy of lawlessness is no longer just a physical map. It is a reflection of a rapidly modernizing society. Crime is a mirror. As India builds, digitizes, and expands, the map of lawlessness simply reshapes itself to reflect those exact societal changes. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly crucial question to consider. What does this shifting anatomy of crime mean for the future of law enforcement in a rapidly modernizing nation? I mean, if the map can change this drastically in just a decade, what is the geography of crime going to look like 10 years from now? It's definitely something to think deeply about as our world continues to blend the physical and the digital. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the data.